Today we have a special guest who has been doing some interesting things in the world of healthy, nutritional snacks that taste good, traditional recipes, traditional ways of cooking. We've got so many folks who are severely harmed in their health because of the ubiquitous presence of vegetable seed oils in our food supply. And we have with us one of the founders of Ancient Crunch, which is the company, the startup behind MASA chips. We have Stephen Arena. How you doing, sir?
Great. Thanks. Thanks, David. Great to be
So,
here.
with a last name like that, you were born for a fight, huh? You
Yeah,
stepped
pretty much.
into the ring.
Here we are. Yeah. I think it was FDR. No, it was Teddy Roosevelt who has like a good speech about the man
Yeah,
in the arena. Yeah, I like that one. That's a
yeah.
good one.
You're going up against Lay's and Doritos and Fritos and all the
Yeah.
big Pepsi and all that. I mean, I know you're not literally taking them on, but you
Yeah.
are kind of. You're making a philosophical critique of them by introducing a product that kind of goes against the whole framework of what we consider to be acceptable food, even at a snack level, right?
For sure. Yeah, they like doing the case studies and like looking at what they actually sell. I mean, everyone knows that they're everywhere, but like the magnitude is insane. I think like Lay's, just the brand Lay's
Mm-hmm.
sells like $10 billion a year, like $1 billion a year. And that's like indescribably massive amounts of food.
And by
And
that you mean the actual standard Lay potato chip, or are you talking
just
about
the standard
everything?
Lay's. No. Frito-Lay is even bigger. I think Frito-Lay itself is like $70 billion. And
Yeah,
then that's not even the whole story because Frito-Lay is owned by Pepsi.
I mean,
So
wars are probably fought over these chips, for God's sake.
yeah, I mean that's a lot of that's a lot of money at stake. Yeah, and it's funny those snacks tend to follow American expansion wherever they go. You see all the pictures. There's one guy on Twitter who posted a really great post about this. Food lies. He talked about how in basically every second and third world country, like as soon as Americanism is sort of introduced, the grocery stores just get full of seed oils, and they have like floor to ceiling aisles of like vegetable oils. They got all the American snacks, and it's like, yeah, that's what we're exporting over there.
Yeah, it's interesting how like third world. I was reading an article the other day. Third world was never originally supposed to be a disparaging term. It was always considered to be actually a critique on colonialism and empire. Like this is the world that's not involved with all that. You know, when you had the
Mm-hmm.
Soviet Empire versus the American Empire and all that. and and it's interesting when you say that because I think about, to this day, Russia is a big, proponent of sunflower oil and that
Yeah,
kind of dangerous seed oil with high linoleic content. And the countries that are influenced by, Russia and Ukraine even are heavy on the sunflower oil.
yeah. I think most of the
America
sunflower
is
oil.
big on soybean oil
Yeah,
and canola oil and all this.
everyone's got their seed oil. It's like their boxing champion.
Yeah.
We got our soybean oil. Yeah, Ukraine
But then
produces I think most of the sunflower oil in Europe.
you have to redeem that word third world, you have this other part of the world where ancestral oils are still used, but though they're pushed out on the margins because of the
Yeah,
influence of these big powers that can
yeah,
kind of push their industrial products onto their territories around the world.
yeah. Those are the people that are like living right, so to
Right.
speak. And it's kind of sad. Like the less developed you go, right, the more traditional the foods are. But like these people are very self-conscious about it because they see the packaged foods as like a sign of like wealth and like Americanism and like prosperity and whatever. So it's like there's this inherent, I guess, lack of self-confidence that goes along with it, which leads them to really want to adopt the modern version. I remember hearing a story about, I think my fiance told me this. She was in Spain and was asking, like, this is before we were dating. She was asking like the restaurant, like, hey, what oil is this cooked in or whatever. And then the guy was talking, like bragging about how it was like vegetable oil, as
Yeah.
because it was like in a remote part of like a village in Spain, and like bragging about how it's vegetable oil because that's like what the Americans use and that's like the modern
Right.
thing. And it's like they're trying to overturn their own traditions in order to like be cool, so to
Right.
speak, which is very sad to hear about.
Yeah. Like India has had an uptick in diabetes since they were, replacing their traditional ghee
Mm-hmm.
and those types of oils with, you know, coconut oil or whatever with you know, this you know, these different seed oils, you know, that
Mhm.
they've adopted, which are highly causative of several serious chronic diseases like metabolic dysfunction. So
Mhm.
what made you is that the seed, did the seed oil topic really drive, was that a big driver for you in making this? And for those who are not familiar with the product, MASA, it's a tortilla chip brand that's available at masachips.com. They sent me some product and I tried them. I thought they were very, really good. It uses well, I'll let you tell the story, but
Sure.
uses a traditional method of making the tortilla chip, right? With the
Yeah. Yep.
mixolation, is that the word?
Nixtamalization. Yeah. So there's two things. The corn itself,
Nixtala, say that mix.
nixtamalization.
Whoa, okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, it's an Aztec word, I believe,
Okay,
nixtamal. Um, and so that process just is just the tortillas. And so the way they did it is like you take the corn, and everyone who's ever had a corn on the cob knows like after you eat corn, there's still corn in the toilet, you know. The husks are very indigestible, among other things. And so nixtamalization takes the raw corn and by boiling it with limestone, like crushed up limestone, like it makes a basic solution that helps loosen the husks of the corn, or like the hard cellulose fiber. It loosens those. There's a whole bunch of other secondary benefits too. It gets rid of the mycotoxins. It makes the certain nutrients and proteins of the corn more bioavailable. Um, and by doing that, it makes corn way more digestible than just like the raw form. So like if you're eating popcorn or corn on the cob or whatever, that's like the raw form of corn.
yeah,
Nixtamalizing it makes it way more digestible. And so like that's the first aspect. And then the second aspect is just the frying, right? All tortilla chips are fried in something. And most of them, pretty much all of them are fried in seed oils. It's really funny if you go to the grocery store and like look at these things. It's not even that they're fried in canola oil. It's like these things are pumped out of factories that are so big and so such high output that they don't even know what oils are in there. If you look at the labels, it'll always say something like sunflower and or safflower and or canola oil. And it's like, dude, they don't even know which oil was used on the chips that are in that bag. It's like kind of hilarious.
yeah. It's like
Um,
playing Russian roulette when it says soybean oil or palm oil, and you're like, which
yeah,
one is it? Because for those
was
who
it?
know that, you know, palm oil is a saturated fat. It's not really a
Yeah.
vegetable seed oil. So you're like, am I getting the batch that's healthy for me, or the one that's
Yeah, it's
with
crazy. Like imagine if there was like a chocolate brand that was like, oh yeah, there's sugar and or maple syrup in this. And
yeah,
it's like, what? Oh
yeah,
yeah, it's butter and or olive oil. Like, no, that would not be tolerated. It's wheat and or corn. Like, no way. But like somehow for seed oils, like you can get away with it. But yeah, so the second part, of course, is we fry in beef tallow, which is the most traditional frying fat. If you have ever heard of Belgian fries or been to Belgium, you'll know that they're the best in the world, and they've been considered that way for hundreds of years, and that's because they're fried in tallow. Um, and so beef fat is easily the best frying oil for a number of reasons. But yeah, it makes the best product, and so those two things really, and the fact that corn, of course, is like organic and whatever. Those two things set it apart from the conventional sort of Tostitos that you could find.
so you make the masa dough, right? And that's the
Yeah.
traditional recipe.
Yeah, exactly. And then we flatten it, and then it's like turned into, you fry them. They're cut into triangles, and then it's like turned into chips. Um, so yeah, that's it. It's actually it's shockingly similar. Like we didn't really reinvent the wheel here. The like if you were to take a time machine and like go to the 1950s or whatever and find tortilla chips, they would have been fried in tallow. All the fryers of America were filled with tallow at that time. But they just like everyone switched out the oils with something completely different, and no one seemed to notice. And so now we have the whole, seed oil epidemic as we've seen. But yeah, it's a chip exactly as you would expect. It's crunchy, it's salty, it tastes like corn. It's not weird, doesn't have a weird texture, it doesn't taste like cardboard. It's like literally what better than what you would expect from like a normal tortilla chip. And that's simply because it's made the right way.
Yeah, and that's the same thing that nixala, the nixolation.
Nixtamalization.
Yeah, that's the thing that they use to make like hominy, you know, which is what
Yeah,
people eat traditionally with
for sure.
soups and things like that from cultures like Mexico, you know, where they have that.
Yeah. Yeah, eating too much non-nixtamalized corn, and like the Aztecs would never do that. They would always nixtamalize it in whatever dish, whether it was a tortilla or they were making like even a grits type thing, whatever they were doing. they'd always nixtamalize it because I think there's some issue. It's vitamin B1, I believe, thiamine, I think. It might be vitamin B3. I'm not entirely sure, but there's one of the B vitamins that you become deficient in if you eat a lot of unnixtamalized corn, and nixtamalizing it gets rid of that issue.
Yeah, Dr. Ray Peat, the late hero for a lot of folks in nutrition science. I got to know him, and he was on the program several times, and he had mentioned that to me about, you know, the MASA versus, you know, using corn flour and it's in the way people would typically think of it. And
Yeah.
that's a better way to eat the product. And
Yeah.
so that's good that you guys incorporated that. Does that add a lot to the cost of that part of it?
I don't think I don't think so. It's sort of like part of making a tortilla chip. Like you
Are a
gotta
lot
get
of traditional brands of like Mexican tortilla brands, do they do that anyways, even though they're
yeah,
using that oil?
so
Yeah,
like
okay.
they I mean the difference is of course is the quality and the way you do it, but like it's kind of necessary in order to get tortillas. A lot of like, so for example, Fritos are not nixtamalized. They use corn flour. And so that's not nixtamalized and you can sort of taste it. There are plenty of other snacks that don't do it, but to have a tortilla chip, like under a rigorous definition of tortilla, it sort of requires nixtamalization. Of course, there's ways of doing it like without filtered water, or, you know, instead of actually using limestone, you just, you know, get some calcium hydroxide from a chemistry supply store or something like that. But yeah, it really, to have a true corn tortilla, you need to nixtamalize it. So I think the primary uniqueness from as far as MASA chips are concerned is for sure the tallow. Yeah.
What about the tallow? How do you source your tallow?
Yeah, so it comes from a few different places basically. Like beef farms, even if you have like hundreds or thousands of head of cattle, you only get so much fat per animal. So it's sort of necessary to get it from multiple different farms. And so we have a few that we like have been trying because, you know, we make a lot of chips, but not a ton yet. And so we've been cycling out different farms and tallow suppliers, testing it out, seeing which one works best. So yeah, 100% grass fed, like farms regionally. And yeah, eventually what we're going to need to do is aggregate a lot of tallow from a lot of different farms, and incorporate that into the product, which is cool because, well, it's a challenge first of all, but on the other hand, it's cool because it means that like Frito-Lay can't just call up their supplier and order like 5 truckloads of tallow. It's not something that you can really do. You can order like a tanker truck full of canola oil to show up at your factory and pump and fill in your fryer, but you can't do the same thing with tallow. So aggregating the small suppliers that like actually focus on quality is something we're like uniquely able to do, which I think is cool.
And your product is available direct to the customer. Do you also have it in retail chains yet, or any small shops?
Yeah, there are a few stores.
Or do you have a website where people can see the stores, or some
we
names
don't
that people might know?
We probably should, but if I think in Southern California is the best bet for people because we're in all the Air Ones, and I think we started in Bristol Farms, which I think they have 14 stores down there. But we have about, I think, 50 to 70. I don't know the exact number of like sort of independent health food stores, farm stands, whatever, that buy direct from us around the country. And I mean, eventually, yeah, we'll be everywhere. But I think for most people, probably easiest to just like find it on the internet right now.
Are you talking to folks like Trader Joe's and Whole Foods and all that? You're
Trader
not ready yet.
Trader Joe's, I don't think they do a lot of like branded products. So like most of the things in Trader Joe's are Trader Joe's brand. So I don't know that that would be a thing, but Whole Foods for sure is definitely a target. We have to make a lot more chips to be able to supply Whole Foods though. So
What's the
that's
target price point? Do you have a target in mind?
yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't necessarily want to give a hard number because I don't want people to come at me later and be like, you said it was going to be this. But definitely, so right now it's about like 3 times more expensive than like, for example, Siete chips, which are, I guess the closest analog. And we want to make
that's the one that uses avocado oil for a lot of their products.
They use avocado oil and they have like grain-free tortilla chips, so no corn. And yeah, they use avocado oil for basically everything because they're a very vegan company. Like they just that's like part
There's
of their
another one,
branding.
Boulder Canyon, that uses avocado oil, right?
Yeah, I think they use avocado oil. Most of the labels I've seen list sunflower oil after avocado oil anyway. So I don't necessarily trust that. They're also like in Wawas and gas stations, and it's like I don't know that I don't know about that.
Mhm.
That's suspicious at this point.
Do you ever see
Um,
your product getting into to Wawa to a gas station?
eventually, but I
Yeah,
think it would be a long time before we get into like those kind of stores.
sure.
Part of the issue with avocado oil, and I wrote a Twitter thread about this the other day actually. Um, it's avocado oil. Think of it as like a waste product, and it's in the sense that like no one farms avocados to make oil out of them. People farm avocados to sell them for $2 each to yuppies in New York and Miami. They don't farm avocado oils to squeeze the oil out like they do olives. Olives are farmed for olive oil. But the thing is, as anyone who's eaten avocado knows, they're very fragile fruits. And so in the supply chain from farm to grocery store, a lot of avocados go bad. And so avocado oil is like one way to salvage some value from like otherwise unsellable avocados. So like that alone is pretty sketchy. Then the other fact is that like avocados are farmed, at least the ones that come from Mexico. The avocado farms are almost entirely owned by drug cartels, who, of course, have no interest in maintaining supply chain integrity and use avocado farming as like a way to launder money. And so, they are liable to do all sorts of sketchy things like lacing or adulterating the oils. And we find this like in a lab, right? There's a study I think that was done by University of California, Davis, I think. And they went to Costco and basically, or some grocery store, and picked out all the avocado oils on the shelf. And they found that like over 80% of them were not real. Either they were rancid or they were laced with some other oils. And so I'm like, if that's the avocado oil you can buy in a shelf, like I'm even more skeptical of the avocado oil that you like get in a tanker truck to some factory. So I personally don't eat avocado oil, and um, I would not really seek to buy snacks with avocado oil.
What about
Uh,
olive oil chips? There's a few high end olive oil
yeah,
chip
I
brands,
think olive oil is real, right? Well, there is good olive oil out there. I don't think it's best
but
for
some of them
fry.
could be laced too.
Yeah,
You know.
for sure. Supply chain integrity is always an issue. I think olive oil is probably a bit better. It's not for like obviously there's a lot of fake olive oil on the market, but there are more sort of trade organizations and oversight that can look into actually good like can look into and protect actually good olive oil. I think the issue for me with olive oil is that like it's not really meant for deep frying.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
I tried this too with coconut oil, like frying things in plant oils. And I don't exactly know this, but I think it has something to do with like the type of fatty acids. Like the saturated fat in plant oils, most of the time is palmitic acid, whereas tallow is full of stearic acid.
Right.
I think it has something to do with like the palmitic acid that makes frying in plant oils like not ideal. Like
Yeah.
they come out greasy. I don't know if
They
you ever
become
found.
unstable too. It creates unstable byproducts. That's what we've had folks on before say you don't really want to fry with coconut oil. You know.
Yeah, and personal experience, like we tried it and like they were greasy. Like you picked it up, you felt your fingers, they were greasy. It like kind of sits in your stomach. I think there are a few brands of like plantain chips out there that are fried in coconut oil. And I have nothing against plantain chips as a concept, but just like I bought them before when I'm like, oh, there's no seed oils in this. I should try this. And then they always like felt greasy and I didn't
Did you
really
ever
like
experiment
them.
with cocoa butter? That's a high stearic acid plant oil.
Yeah, that is. I don't think you really want chocolate corn chips,
Yeah, you
but
can make
no,
a dessert chip out of it. You know.
oh, it is cool. Yeah, no, the chocolate is great. And like cocoa butter is very high in stearic acid, which is strange as far as plant fats are concerned. So yeah, I think it would be cool to get some chocolate stuff going eventually. But that's probably down the line from now.
So, so tell me a little bit about your journey to want to create this. What were you motivated by the seed oil topic a lot? And of course, there's other
Yeah.
factors, but that's obviously going to be the entry point for a lot of folks that are going to consider buying a product like this.
Yeah. So good question. I personally got interested in health about 9 years ago. When I was in college, I was studying in Belgium, of all places, which is it's just funny in retrospect because like that's where they fry things in tallow. It's just like
Yeah.
an interesting connection. Um, and I had to cook for myself, and for the first time, I was like 19. And in doing so, I started realizing that like what I cooked like affected how I felt because that was the first time I sort of like I had a vertical integration, so to speak, over the supply chain of food going into my mouth.
Yeah.
I went to the store and bought it, I cooked it, I ate it, and then I experienced how I felt after. And that was eye-opening because I realized that like what I ate affected how I felt, and I could tie the two together. So I started getting really obsessed with healthy eating and nutrition, health foods. And in the intervening years, I went back to school and I was doing all the, making kombucha in my dorm room, sourdough bread in my little oven in my studio apartment, fermenting kefir, like sprouting quinoa and broccoli seeds, and doing all these things. And it wasn't until 2021 that I started posting about it on social media. And I was super tan at the time. I lived in Florida for 2 years. And so I settled on the handle Really Tan Man. I'm talking about like sunlight and tanning and like, natural living. And it just became very clear at the time that seed oils were like one of the things that were preventing people from being able to tan and get good sun exposure. So I started talking about that a lot more. And then they, not just because of me, but because of so many people, they've been blowing up ever since then on the internet. And at some point, I decided it would make sense to, make food that could cater to this. And like, I never really thought I was going to start a chip company, but I believe a year and a few months ago, over New Year's, I was with my friends in Miami for winter break, and one of them was just eating like tacos, like from Uber Eats, with like these disgusting seed oil chips. I'm sure they tasted good, and he was there munching away, and like I just could not hide the look of disgust on my face. And we just got to talking, and he's like a normal diet person. He was under the impression that like, oh, I'm eating my delicious tacos, and maybe they're bad for me, but like, what are you eating, right? Like, you probably don't eat anything good. Like, your life is miserable. And I was starting to explain this. I'm like, actually, no, we could make corn chips in a way that like actually was healthy, and like they would taste even better. And I started talking about the seed oils and how it's like, it's not an inherent property of snacks in general, or corn chips in particular, that makes them bad for you. It's just it's like contingent. It's just that we use poor ingredients. That's why they're so bad. And then it turned into one of those like, okay, well, why don't you do it sort of moments. And so that friend is now my co-founder. And we spent the next few months researching like the feasibility of doing this sort of thing. And ultimately we decided it was worth pursuing. And so I think in Easter of last year, I bought a turkey fryer and some organic tortillas and some grass-fed tallow, and like fried tortilla chips, the first prototype of MASA chips, like in my parents' deck in our backyard. And I like fed them to my family at Easter, and everyone loved them. And then I was like, okay, this is cool. Cause like they are pretty normal people. They're not super into health, at least my extended family. And the fact that they liked them made me realize like, okay, wow, we have a health food that doesn't taste like a health food, or at least what most people expect health food tastes like. Most people have the expectation that health food tastes like cardboard. It's dry. It's got chia seeds or kale or something. And so it was inherently appealing, and it was healthy. And that's how I knew that was like a winning combination right there.
It's interesting that our reigning ideology is very skeptical and of human flourishing and vitality. Mm-hmm. And so health food has become associated with horrible food, because it's like anything that is to help you with your health is like something that will make you miserable.
Yeah.
And make your body not want to eat it, right? Because we're told that our immune system is not to be trusted for fighting off diseases. We're told that, ancestral fats are the bane of your existence because, ancient man, 6,000 years ago was having heart disease because they were frying in beef tallow like you. There's stupid things like this that we're supposed to accept. It's this stupid mythology we've made that's actually an attack on the human body itself, really. I mean, fundamentally, not that they're intending to, maybe some do, but there's this weird hatred of that which is real and natural and for human flourishing that seems to be rooted in our system.
Yeah, I think, like if you go and ask any normal person off the street, like, does healthy food taste good? And they'll say no. All the things that I like that taste good are bad for me, and all the things that are good for me taste bad. Like, everyone is caught in this dichotomy when it comes to food, and maybe health in general, but at least food specifically. I think this comes from two things. One is that it comes from the progression of like food technology, specifically in the areas of food that taste good, right? Like over the past 70 years, there's been innovation in food in the sense of like cheapening and like more artificial ingredients. no one is making artificial ingredient cheap food that tastes bad. No food company wants to sell food that tastes bad. Why would they? So it just so happens to be the case that all of the quote unquote innovation in food ends up in the foods that have all taste good and have always tasted good. The chips that are supposed to be fried in beef tallow, like the meat that's supposed to not have weird preservatives and nitrates and other stuff in it. Like that's where the innovation ended up. So all of a sudden, like tasty foods as a category became co-opted by unhealthy ingredients. And so now we're at the point where people have seen the consequence of this. They've seen the obesity, they've seen the cancer, they've seen the diabetes. And then they all of a sudden think that like, hey, all the foods that I like are bad. It must mean that good foods are bad. Yeah. When people don't necessarily get the difference between inherent and contingent properties of something, they think all the food around me is bad or bad for me.
Like tallow fried donuts with real buttercream or something, would be so much better than cornstarch and seed oil fried donuts. I mean, so the worst, the so-called worst food for you, if you're metabolically healthy, is actually not so bad if you use good flour, what I mean? And
for sure. And like, because I think people are disconnected from their food, so they don't know this, right? They don't know, like if you put a tallow fried donut and a soybean fried donut in front of them, most people would not be able to tell the difference. And so all of a sudden, because the donuts happen to be fried in soybean oil, like they don't know that anything else is possible. That's just what's been given to them. And most people don't question, hey, what could exist as opposed to what does exist. And so then you get this like culturally ingrained idea. I think the other thing is that there's a certain comfort people find in the concept of trade-offs. Like if something's good for me, it must taste bad. If something tastes good, it must be bad for me.
That's what I'm saying. That's the hatred of the vitality of life. That, in order to be healthy, I must suffer.
Yeah. Yeah, because people,
it's not true,
No, but I think there's a psychological comfort for some people in the idea that there's no such thing as perfection. And because there's no such thing as perfection, I mean, that's like a philosophically unsettling idea, right? That perfection cannot exist in the material world. And so in response to that, it's often better, instead of like finding constructive ways of dealing with that, it's often easier for people to just internalize the concept that there is no such thing as perfection and something good must be accompanied by something bad. And I think that's seen all over the place. Like, for example, if you say
like a zero-sum mindset, if there's +2 on my health, it's -2 in the quality and taste or something.
Yeah, like, oh, that guy is really rich, he must be an asshole,
Right.
Or like that girl is really pretty, she must be a bitch, right? Like that kind of thing. Even though there's plenty of attractive women who are nice and there's plenty of rich guys who are also not assholes, people find comfort in the idea of that trade-off.
Right. That's a good point. In Sweden, they have a concept called lagam, which is not too good, not too bad, just in the middle, kind of middling, you know what I mean? And that's their philosophy, but it kind of happens that way in a lot of different cultures, really. I mean,
yeah, that's interesting. Ikea, wonder what Ikea has to say about that.
That's like they're trying to aim for not too high, not too low, not too strong, not too weak, just right in the sweet spot. That kind of lukewarm is not interesting though for when it comes to taste and quality, really, people don't really want that,
No, you have to like make a statement. And like, I think America is like a unique place for that. And it's interesting because
we're still trend setting for right or wrong reasons. People are still, because people emulate our Hollywood, our wealth, our military might, there's whatever they're doing must be the thing.
Yeah.
And I think we need to invert that back to good things, right? So instead of us instead of people imitating our bad stuff, they'll imitate good choices, right?
Yeah. Like it's so like back to the thing in Spain with olive oil and the seed oils. It's like, it's so sad that these people feel the need to like do what we're doing with vegetable oil and whatever. And it's funny because like you go to these people and it's like, dude, haven't you heard? Haven't you been on Twitter? Don't you know seed oils are bad? But it's like they're so many years behind on the culture curve that like by the time they are, getting rid of their olive oil and replacing it with vegetable oils, we've gotten so far past that. It's been decades that we're starting to say, the vegetable oils aren't any good. It's interesting.
Do you think that, with the cost of beef tallow, could you get a reasonable scale to get the price point pretty much identical to a bag of Frito or Lay's or something? Is that possible?
Fritos or Lay's, not possible. Like that's like bottom barrel. Like that's just never going to happen. I think certain other upmarket chips that are slightly cheaper than MASA today is more attainable. So like within
But
the
is it
range of
ever
this,
possible theoretically to make beef tallow fried chips at a price point with enough? I'm not saying
yeah,
I'm just saying
yeah.
in general, can
Oh
the
yeah, yeah, I
industry
see.
ever turn to the point where the bottom of the barrel chip is a tallow in terms of price?
Yeah.
The tallow can match the seed oil chip.
I mean,
Is that possible?
I maybe, but like it's not so easy to answer. So I think it's important to ask, why are the seed oil chips so cheap? Um, and in
Because
addition
they
to
have
this,
nation
yeah.
state like conglomerates behind them. But
Well, yeah, in addition to the scale, I think there's another important reason, which I don't know that's super widely talked about, which is um the government subsidies behind the ingredients used in those
exactly,
snacks. So like organic
exactly,
corn is not subsidized by the federal government. Um, grass-fed beef tallow is not subsidized by the federal government. Yes, soybean oil, soybeans, canola, whatever, these are cheap, but it's a question of how cheap, like the question of how cheap they are on the actual open market is not so easy to answer when the market has been like tainted by the existence of like these subsidies. I can't answer whether in a purely free market, if soybean oil is in fact cheaper than tallow per pound. It would be very hard to answer that question. I suspect it would actually become pretty comparable. And the mechanism, of course, would be that soybean oil becomes more expensive because lack of subsidies would like course correct, and like they'd have to, deal with the issues. They'd have to deal with their own economic fallout and consequences of their decisions. Not like an example. There's many examples, not least of which is like the idea that they have to actually use a ton of expensive pesticides and fertilizers to produce their crop, whereas your regenerative friendly neighborhood beef rancher uses like no chemical additives. The only cost they have is like the land and like the labor, basically. They don't have, and fertilizer is very expensive. It's not like this is cheap stuff. um so I suppose if you were able to eliminate the subsidies and land could sort of revert back to like the ownership and stewardship that makes sense for it, then yeah, you'd
what's
probably
the
see tallow
ownership and
becoming
stewardship
cheaper.
that makes sense for the land?
Um, farmland is best owned by farmland is best farming is best done when the land is owned by relatively small farmers who live on the land, who own it, it's in their family, and take care of it and produce like as much food as possible with the minimal amount of like machinery or other sort of artificial additives. So like take the Amish. They're probably the modern version that exists today of like stewarding land that makes the most sense. They don't have, 20-acre farms, but they also don't have 200,000-acre farms. The right size, I think, obviously very subjective, but I think the right size is probably somewhere in the order of like between 1 and 10,000 acres per farm. If land were split up in this way and taken care of by people who lived on it and like saw like derive some sort of identity and pride from the land and their role and relationship with it, that would be the ideal way of just having farmland set up in not only this country but everywhere.
Yeah, I agree. You're familiar probably with Joel Salatin and the regenerative agriculture
For
scene.
sure.
He's
Yeah,
come
of
on the
course.
program several times, and yeah. What do you say to folks? I've had some folks on the program who have said, we can never, we have to come up with synthetic, oils to replace or not synthetic, but like
Mhm.
different types of oils to create to replace seed oils because traditional fats like tallow and coconut oil and so forth and whatever are not able to actually even if we were to revert everybody to
Mhm.
Joel salad and farms all over America, it wouldn't be enough to actually feed the world with the kind of oil consumption currently provided by seed oil products.
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree. I mean, well, first of all, I don't think we should be trying to feed the world. We should feed ourselves and
Let the world feed themselves too.
yeah, I mean, it's not as if there's
Exactly.
a lack of land. Like America, like Europe's fed itself just fine for millennia.
Well,
Like
they
there's
say the population growths in places like India and stuff, they can't afford to go back to ancestral oils. Like it's because of the industrial vegetable oils that so many
mm,
densely populated areas are able to feed themselves and not go without food, and so
yeah,
therefore you can't
the
rock the
funny
boat
thing
with that.
the funny thing about like poverty in the sort of like international development context is that there's actually a significant difference between $0 a day and $1 a day. Like people who make $0 a day like have access to basically the best food imaginable, and then people who make $1 a day have access to the worst food imaginable. It's kind of funny because if
Like
you
the indigenous cultures that are still
yeah,
living.
if you make $0 a day and you're completely outside of like the sort of modern economic system, like you have everything you need. You hunt, you maybe own some sheep, you're a small shepherd, or you're a pastoralist, you fish, you gather fish, whatever, maybe you have a small farm. All the tools that you have are like made from your environment. There are some tribes in Africa that are good examples of this that like many people that I know personally have like gone and like hung out with. Like the Hadza comes to mind, and like they're just running around. They found a monkey, they hunt a monkey, they eat it, they find some honey, they eat it. And it's like raw local wild honey, they get their raw pasture raised antelope livers and whatever. Like that's the type of thing that like someone in New York City would pay like absurd amounts of money to be able to eat. And yet these people who have $0 a day are eating like that for free. So there is a very big difference between $0 a day and $1 a day, but that's like a whole complicated issue. I don't know that we need to go there. But back to the whole, can America feed at least ourselves
Mhm.
with good
with
food?
ancestral oils like beef
Yeah.
tallow.
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. One good reason, one good thing to think about, or one easy thing to think about, is that when the US, when people first moved here, there were in the early 1800s, for example, there were so many bison around then, ranging from like Canada all the way down to Mexico. So many bison that if you were to add up the bison mass, right? Because bison are a little bit bigger, so it's not a fair comparison in terms of mass equivalents. There was more bison mass in North America in the 1800s than there is cattle mass today. And there were like
In
two
America
people.
or all over the planet.
North America,
Okay.
whatever
Yeah.
the country,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
assuming the bison live in America.
Right.
And Canada doesn't have that many cattle, and it's also huge. So there was way more bison mass then than there is cattle mass today, and we have how many orders of magnitude more people now, right? And if you think about where all the cattle are today, on your daily drive to work, or your listeners when they go out to eat, or when they go out to go to a park to take a hike or whatever in their daily life, how much of the grassland that they see has cows on it? Not very much, right? Like the point of cattle farming is that the limitation you have is really on the grass. In a really real way, grass that just exists with no animals grazing on it is wasteful. It's completely pointless. Lawns, okay, golf courses, whatever, people play on the golf course, but whatever, have a goat instead of a lawnmower, trim the grass on the golf course. Any lawn in America, how many acres of grassland are tied up in lawns in suburbs? And that's just the lawns, right? What about all the fields that you drive by? What about all the fields that are used to farm soybeans or corn that's not fed for humans, but instead used to make biodiesel? What about all the land that's used to use for urban sprawl, basically for highways, all these things? I mean, now I'm not saying we need to like knock down all the roads, but the point is there's a huge amount of wasted potential in the current geography that we have available to us to be able to farm grass-fed regenerative beef. And I mean, I don't have the exact numbers. I'm sure someone could come up with a good estimate of this, but we could easily improve our land utilization in terms of beef production by probably a factor of 2 or 3 at least. And that's just beef, right? And the cool thing about regenerative farms, Joel Salatin, like what he does is you don't it's additive, right? Going back to the zero sum thing, people think, okay, if you're farming soybeans or corn, it's either soybeans or corn on that land. But if you're farming cattle, you put the cattle there. But then after they go through the grass and they eat all the grass, guess what? You send in the chickens on the pasture, and the chickens like poke through their poop and eat the little maggots that have started to grow, and they eat the little bugs. And so now you can not only raise so many cattle on a piece of land, but you can also raise like probably 10 times the amount of chickens on the same land without any additional fertilizers or pesticides or anything. And then what about the plants? I was at a
Yeah.
farm. This is actually at the Rogue Food Conference, which was co-hosted by Joel Salatin
Yeah.
last year. We
Which
went to
one
the
did you go to?
It was in Mayo, Florida last year.
Okay.
We toured this farm afterward, and the guy, he did this really cool thing. He had like a windswept sort of valley. It was like grassy, but the wind was really strong. And so what he did is he planted chestnut trees like not densely, but like one every like 50 feet or something. And he had chestnut trees in the little pasture, and that broke up the wind, and that was really cool. That was like an advantage for him. But guess what? Now he gets chestnuts. He gets hundreds of pounds of chestnuts a year on the same land that like he can still farm the same amount of cattle in, right? So now you send in the cattle because a chestnut tree only takes up like what a foot of diameter, per chestnut tree. That's nothing when you're talking about acres of land. So you send in the cattle, then you send in the chickens. Now you have chestnut trees that are producing chestnuts, and it's like all of a sudden you just keep adding layers onto the land utilization, and you get, I'm not going to say infinite food, but you get an overflowing abundance of food on land that, like, if you were farming corn or soybeans, is an either or situation.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the land utilization in this country is like pathetic, basically.
Right.
And so anyone who's talking about like actual limitations in our ability to produce food, like it's just crazy. There is a limitation that's not the physical constitution of the land, though, that's worth mentioning, which is the economic incentive. And so, like I said before, the best farms, and they're all like this, how like Joel Salatin's farm, White Oak Pastures, the farm I was talking about in Mayo, Florida, none of these are much bigger than 10,000 acres. And White Oak Pastures is like probably one of the biggest regenerative farms, probably the biggest regenerative farm in the country. The problem is that even if you have full land utilization, make the most amount of abundant, high quality food that in the way that we've been talking about, if you try to do that on 10,000 acres, you only make so much money. You tap out, whatever it is. I don't know. Is it $1 million a year? Is it $10 million a year? Is it $50 million a year? Whatever. Somewhere you tap out. It's definitely less than $100 million a year. And then you can't make any more money. And so food companies don't operate in the way that necessarily people think they do. People often talk about like, oh, product margin or profit margin, all this and that. It's not so much about profit margin. It's about like profit scalability. If you can make a 50% margin, but only scale that to 100 million in revenue, that's a lot worse from your bottom line perspective than if you can make a 30% margin and scale it to $1 billion. Because in the latter instance, you made $300 million, but in the former instance, you made $50 million. And so $300 million is better than $50 million. And so the issue is not about profitability. Grass-fed butter is much higher margin than soybean oil. Grass-fed beef is much higher margin than whatever the alternative is, like tofu or something. But grass-fed beef is not scalable, and tofu is scalable. Butter is not scalable, and seed oils are scalable. So in the model we have, where companies desire sort of monopolistic ownership and like trend toward infinite scale, it doesn't actually matter what's more efficient and what's more high, like what's better margin. What matters is how far they can push it.
It's just endless mimetic desire to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it doesn't have any satiation. Just when you have these ruthless multinational corporations that are only looking at their quarterly earnings,
that model is inherently it's antithetical to the model of sort of like limited, like land-based, like family land-based ownership of the farmland, family-based ownership of the farmland.
Exactly.
And so no matter how efficient that family farm gets, they're never going to be as big as like someone who can do the whole thing. So that's the real reason why people claim, I think, that seed oils are necessary to feed the world, or whatever it is, Beyond Meat is necessary to feed the world.
Seed oils are necessary for endless profit.
Yeah, seed oils are necessary to become a $70 billion a year company.
But that's ultimately blood money, and we have to explain that to some point. We have to be patient and gracious to people who don't understand. But there's always a period where you have to be, but at some point we need to say that that's blood money, because how many people are suffering from all these various diseases that we believe the science evidence continues to point to being driven by these ubiquitous consumption of seed oils with a carbohydrate. That's the worst thing you can do, is take a starch and fry it in rancid seed oils and give that to people. I think that's a horrible thing to make billions and billions of dollars of doing, and you have to say, well, they don't know what they're doing, but they do know. Someone in Lay's potato chip knows the science of what's going on.
At some point. I mean, like, not only is this like bad because it causes like the suffering of people who like are fed these, or that eat these bad ingredients. Like, even if you were to take that away, and they stop suffering, they would eat healthy foods and whatever, that would be a huge win. But what about the fact that if you had this sort of model of land ownership where people own, 1,000 to 10,000 acre parcels of land and they farm it with their families and it's multi-generational, blah, blah, blah. What do you have? You have a lot of people who have very good income producing assets that they can pass down to their families, right? The wealth in the sort of Frito-Lay model is very concentrated toward the top, whereas the distributed farmland, let's call this the Roman Republic model, because that's how land was distributed in the early days of Rome. The Roman Republic model gives you a very much like lower income inequality, basically. And so the people who are not only eating seed oils because they don't know better, but they also can't afford much higher quality food. Now you not only give them a way to make more money and afford better food, they also have better food to be able to buy once they can afford it. And it's just like it evens out the whole system. And I mean,
and they're
that's
not
just
subsidizing with their tax dollars these foods that are killing them.
yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah. So
how much would a potato chip bag be without the subsidies? I wonder what that would look like.
I don't know. That would be interesting.
Wouldn't it be interesting to see what the real price of these things are without their little welfare?
I don't know who I could get to do the math on that, but I think that'd be pretty cool to see. But yeah, I'm sure if I just had to guess, I'm sure it would probably be like probably 2 to 5x what it currently costs. I don't think it's an order of magnitude, but it's probably not nothing.
So if you remove those subsidies, do you think that a product like yours at some point in the future could be priced the same price as the seed oil chip?
Yeah, I think for sure. I think it also depends on a lot of the other factors we discussed, such as like the distribution of land ownership and whatever else. But yeah, theoretically, for sure. Although I don't necessarily think the best goal is like from a societal standpoint would be to like lower prices of things as opposed to enable people to have the money to be able to afford higher quality things.
Right. Well, that's another issue is money having value.
Yeah.
I'm always looking at how to help Homer Simpson be healed, like because we always know that the people who are going to listen or chase after these topics, the early adopters are going to be they're going to be pre-selected for being concerned with their health. But I always think about how do we help Homer Simpson not be so tortured by heart disease and statins and diabetes and cancers popping up over and over again for 3 decades.
My personal answer to this is like health has to be the default choice. Every day people wake up and the decisions that are the easy and obvious decisions for them are the unhealthy ones. And it's not that they make unhealthy decisions because of their ignorance or because of their lack of willpower, which some have ascribed these, vices to such people. It's not that they're unhealthy because of those things. It's unhealthy because the vast majority of people go through life according to the pattern that has been laid out for them by whatever, parents, society, whoever it is.
Mimetic role models, yes.
Exactly. They go to the food stores, they buy the food at the food stores, they go to their doctor, they eat the food that the doctor tells them to do. They go to school lunch and they get their food at the food counter, and everyone's telling them it's food this whole time. And so then they grow up and then they become an adult and they have to go buy food and they buy the same food. And it's like, okay, whose fault is this? Like it's the same thing. Like people were skinny in the 1950s. I always tweet about this. And it's like, they're not any more virtuous. Like your average, normal person in the 1950s who's fit, whether it's man or woman, whatever it is, who they're fit, they're attractive. They're not any better than the normal person today. They don't have more willpower. They're not more virtuous. They're not more moral. It's just that the easy path for them at the time, due to the social construction, was one that at least encouraged health in some way. Yeah. They went to the food store, they went to the diner, they got their liver and onions, and they got their milkshake with grass-fed milk because that's what cows ate. They got their bread and their hamburger buns, which was made with flour that didn't have pesticides in it. They had their cheese on their cheeseburger, which was like actually real cheese and not made in a plastic factory by Kraft or whatever. And that's it. They went out, they lived their life, and they were healthy because the easy path was the healthy path. They're not superior people, right? And today it's the opposite. The same people, their literal grandkids and great grandkids of those exact same people today are overweight, have diabetes, because they do the exact same things. They go to the food stores, they buy the food, they go to the restaurants, they go to the grocery store. And so the real solution to this is not, and some people I think have the idea that we have to like educate everyone and tell everyone all these things. And like, if only we could spread the message. I don't think that's the case. The actual solution is for people to enable a society where the easy choices are the healthy choices. That's the
That's
job
what
of
I'm trying to. Yeah, that's
yeah,
what I'm saying when I say let Homer Simpson be healthy. So
exactly.
he
You don't
could
have to,
just default be healthy without having to be a health nut. You know what I
right.
mean?
You're not trying to teach him about linoleic acid and
Exactly.
and like lipid peroxidation,
Exactly.
right? Homer Simpson does not need to know about that. He just needs to be able to go to Wawa and buy good food and
Exactly.
like, or just buy
That's why
food.
I want your product in Wawa. That's because I'm
Oh,
thinking.
yeah.
I'm like, I'm just always trying to. I want to solve the hardest problem first, and then then deconstruct back all the way back to where I'm at. You know what I mean? To
Mhm.
see the blueprint of how to get from there.
Oh yeah,
Like
no. I mean, I
deconstruct the
don't.
hardest nut to crack first, and then
Yeah.
walk it all the way back to where I'm at, and then you can kind of see where to go forward.
Oh, for sure. I mean, yeah, that is the ultimate solution, right? It has to be in Wawa. I mean, pragmatically speaking, Wawa is not our first stop on the
Sure, of
journey.
course. You just started.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, of course. Well, I would want everyone to be able to buy this, or whether it's my food or anyone else's food that's like good for them and like tastes good and like they don't have to think about it. Of course I would like that.
Well, it's
And
like
I a lot of the business decisions, like the long-term strategy that we have, is oriented around achieving that ultimate outcome, which I'm very excited about, of course.
being overweight, and like you said in the earlier times, was not a sign. Dr. Kate Shanahan and others have pointed that out on my program. Was not a sign of having a disease state. If you were overweight off of steak fat, milk fat, and honey, that was different from being overweight because of
Yeah.
you've destroyed your mitochondrial health because of
Yeah.
linoleic acid excess consumption
Gosh.
from omega
I mean,
6
I don't naturally put on a lot of weight, but like I can't even imagine what I would have to do to get overweight on like a diet of like real food.
Right, right.
It would probably
Well, that's
be
why it was considered a
pretty
sign
scary.
of being
Yeah.
aristocratic if you were, because you're like, what abundance does this person have access
Yeah.
to?
I
This is a sign of
honestly,
high status that William Howard Taft, I mean, probably
yeah,
had something going on with his
yeah,
thyroid there, but
yeah.
that these folks could get so big when they're not eating excess omega-6 rich foods.
Yeah, it's really shocking. I mean, even access, like I eat whatever I want and I'm never hungry. I don't personally don't do intermittent fasting or anything. And I just don't gain weight. The only weight I gain is if I work out, which is like maybe my metabolism is higher than average. So like that's fine. But yeah, to be able to get like to like Henry VIII on like the medieval,
Whale.
like
He must have been eating a lot of chicken fat or poultry fat has a lot of omega-6
yeah,
naturally. So he probably
possibly
was tearing
also,
the hell out of the
yeah. I mean, a
whale and
lot of
everything.
bread too. I'm sure a lot of bread can really do it.
Yeah.
A lot of bread plus a lot of the sort of omega, like the chicken fat and stuff. And it is true that like medieval European aristocrats ate more chicken than we would have expected because eating chicken was considered a sign of wealth. Like the
Yeah.
fact that you could kill your
He was
source of
tearing into
eggs.
those pheasants probably. He
Yeah,
was probably eating a lot of organ meat too, though.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's honestly quite astounding to that he got that big. But
What
yeah,
What do you think of the meme from it's I don't know if David Lynch said it, but it says, "Believe it or not, America is cursed by Mesoamerican corn demons." Uh, do you, do you think that that is a kind of a metaphor for what we're going through in our country right now, where we're subsidized and we've got
yeah.
corn coming out of our ears, and we don't know what to do with it? It's
Yeah,
like we're possessed by this. You
I
know,
mean, the corn and it's like the way corn is done in the US today and the products it ends up into is certainly not conducive to a fit population. At the same time, though, I have no reason to believe the Aztecs were fat and they ate corn. And then that's like they were the ones that started the whole corn eating thing. So I don't know that,
but they were not doing it the way we do it.
yeah, for sure.
They weren't
So
using
yeah,
cornstarch like we
yeah,
use in every food, and they weren't using pesticides, and they weren't using
yeah,
nutritiously depleted soil, and they
for
weren't
sure.
using seed oils to fry it in, and they were
Yeah.
say that word again.
Nixtamalized.
Okay, nixtamalized.
Yeah, there you
Nixtamalized.
go.
Should have
There you
looked at
go.
it more before I asked.
But yeah, I mean, so the David Lynch quote, yeah, probably that statement is contingently true, but it does not need to be true for sure.
Right. So
Yeah,
we need
makes
to
sense.
exercise those spirits out of our culture.
Yeah, exercise the seed oil demons.
Well, I really appreciate your time. It's been a fascinating discussion. Any final thoughts? And of course, you can go to masachips.com. And that's MASACHIPS.com,
For
where
sure.
you can buy the product. Do you have a product you can show people what it looks like, the chip?
I have a bag
Yeah.
back
Okay.
here, an empty bag I can show you.
Let
Give
me
me a
show you
second.
that.
Yeah, this guy right here.
Very good. Okay, now tell us about the color scheme. Can you show that again for the listening audience?
Sure. So it is vertical orange and white stripes with a blue word mark, and a little monogram MASA logo, designed to evoke the vibe of a sort of Adriatic Italian beachside.
Can you come in
town.
closer to the mic real
Oh,
quick?
sorry. Yeah, it designed to evoke the vibes that like a Adriatic seaside town in Italy. You know, let's say you're in Positano, and the beach umbrellas and the beach towels have these like brightly colored white and colored stripes on them. That's the whole vibe. It's supposed to be this like sun, summer, good vibes, leisure, decadence, like sophistication. That's what we're going for.
I'm seeing a meme you posted on Ancient Crunch, a picture of people at a spring, it looks like, and it has those same red and white colors.
Yeah, for sure.
It says, it is important to realize that the good life is attainable and always has been. What is the good life?
Oh, I have to dust off my Aristotle to answer that one for you. I think an easy way or an accessible way of defining it would be not making compromises, and living to your greatest God-given potential. I'll say that. That's probably a more poetic way to say it.
And what success look like to you when you're retired? Where do you want to see what you're doing materialize in?
In terms of how it affects the world, I think success would be measured by the fact that like everyone, or at least most people, have easy access to food that supports their health instead of harms it. Whether it's packaged foods at the grocery store, or they know where their local farmer is, or if they live in a place where there are no local farmers exist. The foods that you need to like support life are not hard and not unattainable for your average person.
Very good.
Yeah.
I think that's a great goal to have, and I wish you the best of luck or Godspeed in your endeavors, more importantly, because we need to have people have access to quality products that are real foods that don't harm them every time they're hungry. And don't make them hungrier, by the way. That's another thing that seed oils do. They trigger the munchies, so you eat the whole bag. And it's nice to have an ethical food, Chip, that when you eat it, it satiates you.
Oh yeah, you're full.
And I'm glad that you didn't add MSG or anything, because you tried to override the satiating factor of beef tallow. No, that's what profit-driven thinking does, right? Try to.
No, we want our people to eat and then stop. Yeah.
Very good.
For sure.
Thank you.
Of course.